Next up in free agency news is David Finlay, Fit Finlay's son, former TNA Tag Team Champion David Finlay, is hitting free agency. If you've heard this before, it's because its story comes out every year at this time. Right around January 1st, right around January 4th actually, but it's usually within a couple of weeks, give or take, we find out that David Finlay's contract is coming due and that he's interested in a move to the States. I think we've heard it for 4 years in a row. Chris Hamza even, I think, posted it in one of the Discords that I'm on, and he screenshotted the stories that have come out every year. But there's been some chatter the last couple of days that this actually might be the year that he makes the move. Where would he go? Well, his dad works for NXT, but WWE has passed on him before. And I don't know that he is the type of star that they would be looking for. David Finlay's good. He's pretty good. Now, I will admit, I have not been watching his run this year, but I did see some people talk about his run this year might have been his best run so far in New Japan. But what I had seen years previous is I saw a guy with some talent who is not a top star, who is a pretty good wrestler, a solid wrestler that could be a good mid-card, upper mid-card in most companies. Probably not a top guy. If TNA did bring him in, I don't think they would see him as a top guy. Could be wrong. Tommy Dreamer obviously has an affinity for Fit Finlay. I could see him maybe wanting to bring in David Finlay. It would be a big deal to me if they brought him in, and I would want them to push him up as maybe a challenger for Mike Santana. Should Mike Santana finally get the belt back and kind of go on a long babyface run? I don't know that that's ever going to happen, but we'll see. But I would see him more in that international title range for TNA, and that's a good spot to be for a guy like for David Finlay. NXT did sign David's brother Brogan Finlay, and they changed his name, and they did the same thing to Regal's kid. They brought him in and changed his name, and he's going nowhere. In fact, he's probably some of his best stuff has been overseas and in TNA than he's had in NXT. So I don't know that WWE would be the spot for him. I don't think that TNA would actually make a play for him because he was never a WWE star, and he was never a AEW star. And if they're going to bring somebody in that they would have to turn into a star, they're probably going to bring them in at a lower level. And I think David Finlay sees himself making more money than what TNA would probably offer. That's just my read on the situation. I don't know that for a fact. But again, just spitballing here. I just see the way TNA operates, and especially since if Scott D'Amore were in charge, I think that he would make a play for Finlay for sure. But Scott D'Amore is no longer in the company. Since he's left, they've gotten rid of guys that are like really good wrestlers who aren't big stars. They got rid of Josh Speedball, although Speedball probably wouldn't have left. I think Josh would have stayed had TNA made him an offer for sure. In fact, I know for a fact he would have. They lost Speedball. I think Speedball was going. They purposely got rid of Kushida. They got rid of Trent Seven. And they got rid of several other guys because I don't think that they thought that they were worth the money that they were making because they weren't big stars in the U.S. And then who did they replace them with, right? The first name that comes to mind is Elijah. Like, that's the type of guy that they're going for. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine who was pretty plugged in with the Japan scene. And he's like, do you think TNA would take him? I was like, well, he's not a big U.S. star. He's never a big star in WWE. He was never a big star in AEW. And he can't sing. So I don't know. I don't know that TNA would value him. He's a good wrestler, and I think he would upgrade the work rate in the company. I think he's found himself as a heel in Japan. But they don't really care what happens in Japan. They don't value that. And I just don't think that they would see it in him. And that's a shame. They would value somebody off the NXT roster more so than they would value David Finlay, who would be 100 times better than somebody off the NXT roster. They would value a lower level WWE guy working, lower card matches on Raw and, on WWE main event than they would a David Finlay. That's just the reality of the situation. Um, with exceptions to people that have made it into AEW. Now, would he be a fit in AEW? I think that he would be a fit, but I don't think that Tony sees it in him either. And it's like, Mike, how could you say that? Why would you think that? Tony never brings David Finlay in. You can tell the guys that he wants in his company from New Japan. He constantly brings them in all the time. He would take Zack Sabre Jr. today if Sabre wanted. He was obviously look who they signed that they kept bringing in. They signed Jay White, who had been doing shots for AEW, like right after AEW and New Japan started working together. Jay White immediately started coming in, and the next thing you know, Jay White signs with AEW. They brought in Will Ospreay a lot, right? And then of course he's one of the greatest in the world, but you could tell that they wanted him in because they kept bringing him in from Japan. They kept asking to borrow him. Okada kept coming in and doing matches. And the list just goes on and on. Gabe Kidd now, like when Gabe Kidd's contract is expired, he's coming to AEW for sure. Like he's going to be done in Japan at some point, and he's going to be working for AEW. And I mean, like Mercedes Moné, of course, right? Like she was a New Japan wrestler, and eventually they just brought her in. They just signed her. So David Finlay hasn't been one of those guys. They have not been bringing him in. So I think that if they wanted him, they could have had access to him this whole time, and they have just not brought him in. So I don't think that it's a lock that he goes to AEW. In fact, I think it's more than likely that he stays in New Japan. More than likely he stays in New Japan. Clark Connors, his deal's coming up. I think he stays in New Japan too. He's not very good. Like he looks like I always call him I call him middle school Adam or 8th grade Adam Page. Like he wears the cowboy hat. He's got the curly hair. He's got the facial hair that looks just like him. He sometimes dresses like a cowboy, and he's got the way his face looks. He just looks like a smaller version of Hangman. And it's like, why would you bring in Hangman on Wish? I don't know. But he's not a bad wrestler, but he's just, there's nothing about Clark Connors that screams to me that somebody needs to sign this guy. I think he stays with New Japan. I think that's the only company that would value him or covet him. And you see the level that they see him at. He's, working 6-mans, and like he's never going to be a star for New Japan. And I don't think that he'll ever be a star in America. That's mean to say. That's just my read on the situation. I hope he proves me wrong. I got nothing against the guy. I'm sure he's a fine person. I just don't see him being a major star in the U.S. And because of that, I don't think that TNA would value him.